Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. Earlier this week, I was tagged by the folks at Codex Cantina to do the Skyrim tag, and now I'm answering their own We Ain't Getting Younger book tag, designed to celebrate Krypto's 40th birthday. I'm posting my response belatedly on April 24th in celebration of not only his birthday, but my own. Although I'm more than a decade ahead of him, I'm happy to be celebrating together. Happy birthday, Krypto. So let's get to the tag. Question number 1. While it's proven too many birthdays can kill you, the amount of cake we can eat is still under debate. Name the most recent book that gave you a sugar high. I'll go with the absolutely charming book by D.E. Stevenson, Miss Buncle's Book. I've mentioned before that I went through treatment for breast cancer a few years ago, and chemotherapy really zapped my ability to read anything. And it took much longer to recover from that inattention than I had expected. One of the first books I got through, several months after chemo ended, was this one. Miss Buncle's Book is a novel set in the 1930s about a genteel spinster who, when she knows she needs to make some money, decides to write her own book. She uses her crazy neighbors as her fodder, adding in a few extra adventures and romances, etc., then publishes the book anonymously. To her surprise, it becomes a bestseller. Eventually, when her community figures out that the book is in fact about them, they are horrified and try to figure out who wrote it. This book, Stevenson's book, that is, not Miss Buncle's, sounds like it might be quite traditional in its values, but it's actually pretty regressive and accepting of different kinds of relationships and people. All in all, it's a very sweet read. Perhaps even a little too sweet, at least to be an appropriate read for weeknight meals. The second question. Sometimes we get older and wider instead of older and wiser. Name the longest book you've ever read. I've not really read a ton of long novels. I still have most of Dickens' tomes left to read. I've read Anna Karenina, but not War and Peace. I've read the entirety of the Bible, but as Krypto said, that doesn't really count. I'm not sure it's literally the longest I've read, but I'll choose A.S. Byatt's The Children's Year. The paperback version was about 900 pages, I think. I read it when it was first published in 2009, and I haven't reread it since, but I really loved it that first time. The book explores the life and family of a children's book author living through the Edwardian period. I was especially intrigued with all the philosophical talk about craft, the craft of writing, but also the crafts of pottery and puppetry. I've always been a Byatt fan, and I would love to read her Possession again sometime soon, a book I haven't read since it was published almost 30 years ago. As for a super long book I have not yet read, I'm hoping to eventually bite off A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth, nearly 1,500 pages, which is definitely a little daunting for one volume. On to the next question. The best part about pictures is that they're always a younger version of you. Name a book that you enjoyed more the first time you read it than the second. As a young person, I enjoyed Madeleine L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time, the story of Meg and Charles Wallace and one of their friends, who travel magically in the company of a quirky group of guides. I grew up completely secular, and as a child I was a little put off by the book's heavy-handed emphasis on Christian ideology. But as I matured, I fell in love with some of the author's works for older people. I started understanding and appreciating Christian symbolism, still very much as a secular person, but as one who appreciated both the moral thinking and the literary context. I didn't reread A Wrinkle in Time until my son was young. I had high hopes that my appreciation of L'Engle would mean I would like A Wrinkle in Time more on this adult reading. I was wrong. I wasn't put off by the Christian imagery this time, but I was annoyed by the awkward plot development, the sloppy writing, and the all-too-obvious character development. I liked it less than I did as a young person. Interestingly, my husband, who had much fonder memories of this book from when he was young, also found it pretty disappointing upon reread. The fourth question. As you get older, you must learn to never skip a bathroom break before jumping in a car ride. Name a book you read in very few sittings. I used to read almost every book in one sitting. Nancy Drew, and later Agatha Christie, but also the novels of Eudora Welty, or Gloria Naylor, or Gail Godwin. One novel I read completely in one go, literally carrying the book in the bathroom in my hand as I cooked dinner and made tea, etc., was The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. I did not do it because I was utterly absorbed. I wasn't. But I was running late for preparing for a graduate level seminar and needed to read it carefully and quickly. I did not love the book, but it raised some really fascinating questions, explicitly about gender, and perhaps accidentally about the history of chattel slavery in the United States. It was a great book to discuss with nerdy friends in class. I guess I've read novellas and very short novels, as well as a fair bit of nonfiction in one gulp since, but I usually take a little more time with novels these days. Oh, actually, now that I think about it, I read all the major novels of Thomas Hardy, minus Jude the Obscure, but plus Under the Greenwood Tree, during 1 week a couple of years ago. Long story, which I'll save for another time. Question 5. Don't let old age get you down, because it's harder to get you back up these days. Name a book you had to put down and why. Almost 30 years ago, a friend of mine, someone who's become a very good friend of mine over the years, who will remain nameless, and who was not much of a reader at that point, told me about a book he really enjoyed reading, Presumed Innocent by Scott Turow. He told me I would never guess who done it. I started reading, making it through maybe the first 30 pages, and didn't like the prose. I found portrayals of race, gender, and sexuality to be dated, even though I was reading it only a handful of years after it was initially published, I think. The biggest problem is that I was immediately sure who the murderer was. The author set up everything and kept hammering in a way I think that someone who had learned to close read literature absolutely could not miss. I told my friend I thought I knew who it was. He laughed and told me I was wrong, that I would never guess, and asked who I thought it was. I told him, and he looked stunned. I tried to explain how I knew, showed him quotes from the very first chapter, but he acted like I must have some magical skill. I think it may have been the first time I really impressed him. Well, like I talked about in my Skyrim Shakespeare tag when I mentioned Prospero, here the magic came just from studying books. You know how plots work, how tropes work, how foreshadowing works. Since the book seemed to be such a hit because of the suspense alone, and since the author spoiled that suspense himself, at least for me, I put the book down. Perhaps I would have enjoyed the novel, and I'll never know. I have a confession to make. That close friend has recommended several other books to me since, and I often shy away from them, fearing that I'll be that annoying, nerdy friend who stomps all over someone else's great pleasure. Anyone know the book Presumed Innocent? What do you think? Did I abandon it before I should have? Next question. Age isn't how long you've been alive, it's how many lives you've lived. What book genres have you been wanting to try outside of your comfort zone? Actually, I'm not especially interested in reading genres outside my comfort zone, but I do like pushing myself to read books outside my comfort zone. I'm a little embarrassed sometimes to acknowledge how much is beyond my comfort zone. Recently, I just got brave enough to read some of Virginia Woolf's fiction, which I absolutely loved and which I'm really looking forward to reading more of. An author who has totally scared me off for years, but which I want to try sometime soon, is Proust. I think I have an in-real-life reading buddy to help me through a bit of it this summer, perhaps. More on that in a later video. When I do read Proust, I promise I'll go outside my baking comfort zone as well and try my hand at making a batch of Madeleines. Okay, question 7. Life gets worse the older you get. Luckily, you don't have much left. Name a book that slowly turned sour for you, but you finished it anyway. Were you glad you stuck it out? I'm not sure I have a great answer for this one. I think I'll choose what's clearly a very polarizing book, one that also meets the next prompt. Peer pressure seems to decrease as you get older. Where did all your friends go? Name a book that you checked out because of peer pressure. Were you happy to have read it? And that book is my rereading of Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights. When I read it back when I was about 14 years old, I really did not like it. Mostly I thought it would meet that absolutely enormous hole, a hole exactly the shape of Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. Wuthering Heights does not fit into that hole. After talking to people in BookTube, I decided I was probably being really unfair to Emily and her novel. So I reread it for Victober last year, and honestly, I did not like it this time either. But I was really fascinated by what Emily Bronte was trying to do and by how the book works. So yes, I am glad I stuck it out. There's only one other book I hated from my high school days, and that was Edith Wharton's Ethan Frome. It took me a while to get over my fear of her as an author, but I've now read several of her novels, The Age of Innocence, The House of Mirth, The Custom of the Country, all of which I loved. I haven't yet gone back to Ethan Frome. Will I like it more, reading as an adult? Any peer pressure to read it? Well, that wraps it up. Happy birthday, Krypto. Thanks for letting me celebrate with you. And thanks to all of you for joining me today on Hannah's Books. See you soon.